Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we turn complex research into, well, essential knowledge. Today we're wrestling with a concept that really changes how we think about extinction risk. It's called the Allee effect. And we're doing a deep dive based on the insights from Courchamp, Berec, and Joanna Gascoigne in their really landmark 2008 book, Allee Effects in Ecology and Conservation. It's amazing how it shows this decades-old idea, almost forgotten, suddenly becoming critical for, saving species today.
Exactly. And for most of us, when we think about population ecology, we think density dependence. Too many individuals, more competition, disease, stress, so fitness drops. That's standard. But the Allee effect is, well, it's the terrifying flip side. It describes this causal positive relationship between the number of individuals in a population and their fitness.
So simpler terms.
Basically, the rarer you are, the harder it gets to survive and reproduce.
Okay, let's unpack that a bit. If being rare is itself a killer, why did this idea, get shoved aside for so long? Clyde Allee was talking about this way back in the 1930s.
Yeah, in works like Animal Aggregations and The Social Life of Animals.
So why did conservation biology kind of ignore him for 50 years?
Well, it seemed to be a classic case of scientific focus. When conservation biology really got going in the 1980s, the pioneers were focused on what they termed the extinction vortexes. People like Gilpin and Soule identified, I think it was 4 main biological forces they saw pushing species towards extinction.
Right, things like random population fluctuations, right, demographic variability.
Exactly that, and habitat fragmentation, which is still huge.
Yeah.
And also the loss of fitness from reduced genetic diversity, inbreeding depression.
Okay. But the things Allie described, like not being able to find a mate easily or not having enough numbers to defend the group, those didn't make the official list.
Precisely. Most of the biological forces we now bundle together as Allee effects just weren't enshrined as these major extinction vortexes back then.
Yeah.
The field was simply looking elsewhere. They were prioritizing genetic threats, habitat loss, the physical stuff. So the whole subject just, well, it languished.
Wow. And you can really see how deep that blind spot went. There's this great anecdote in the book, almost embarrassing, really. Apparently, a journal editor in the 80s got a manuscript about Allee effects, sent it back, said it should go to a genetics journal.
Because they misread Allee as allele.
Yeah. Just shows how little the concept was on ecologists' radar then. What a difference, the couple of decades since this book came out have made.
It really illustrates how scattered the work was. It's almost like the concept itself was suffering from an Allee effect. Not enough researchers focused on it to give it traction. But this book was key in consolidating everything.
Okay, so if the scientific world kind of missed this for decades, what actually happens to a species when this unseen threat kicks in? This is where it gets really dark, doesn't it? What are the practical, frightening consequences for a species when its numbers start to drop?
This is where it gets genuinely scary for conservationists, yeah. The Allee effect means a rare species isn't just, surviving poorly. It might actually cross a lower critical threshold density. Think of it like a safety net just vanishing beneath them. This threshold, it's an unstable point, and crucially, it's well above zero. It's not just about having none left.
So it isn't just about having, say, one male and one female left. You could have 50, maybe even 100 individuals, but if that's below their specific critical threshold, they're still essentially doomed.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
If a population falls below that critical size, the positive feedback loop, the Allee effect, takes over.
Yep.
They just aren't strong enough anymore to overcome the normal challenges. Their decline accelerates rapidly towards oblivion. It's not just an extinction vortex, that slow downward spiral. This transforms it into an extinction black hole.
Black hole, meaning once you cross that event horizon, that threshold, there's no pulling back. Extinction becomes almost inevitable and fast.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And the really worrying thing is the evidence Courchamp and his colleagues gathered suggests these effects are way more widespread than we used to assume, maybe even common.
Which makes this threat highly relevant to almost any endangered species project out there.
Definitely.
So the core of the book then explains how this positive relationship works. We know that it happens, but what are the specific causes? What drives this link between numbers and fitness? I mean, it sounds a bit like just saying animals group up for safety. What makes this a distinct problem that needs its own name?
It's a distinct problem because these are fundamental survival or reproductive needs that only start to fail when the population gets too sparse. When you look at the mechanisms, they often fall into failures in necessary social benefits or even environmental conditioning. So on the reproduction side, maybe the simplest failure is just mate-finding limitation.
Right. Can't breed if you can't meet.
Exactly. If you're, say, a rare orchid or a slow-moving reptile, and individuals are scattered miles apart, finding a partner within the breeding season becomes a real long shot. The sparser they are, the less likely it is.
And I guess for organisms that can't move, like sessile ones, plants relying on wind pollination or marine creatures that just release sperm and eggs into the water, density must be everything there.
Absolutely critical. For anything relying on broadcast spawning or suffering from pollen limitation, you need a high concentration of neighbors. Simple physics, really. If the density drops, the concentration of pollen or gametes just gets too diluted. Fertilization rates plummet, maybe even to zero, even if the individuals themselves are perfectly healthy and reproductive.
Okay, so that's reproduction. What about just basic survival, the group benefits?
Yeah, that's where social animals can hit hard limits at low numbers. Bigger groups often provide essential protection from predation. This works in a couple of ways. First, there's the dilution effect. Simple odds. If you're one zebra in a herd of 1,000, your personal chance of being targeted by a lion is pretty low.
Safety in numbers.
Right. And the second is enhanced defense or increased vigilance. More eyes and ears mean predators get spotted sooner, and a larger group might actually be able to actively deter or fight off a predator, something an isolated pair just can't do.
Makes sense. And you mentioned environmental factors, too.
Yeah, we can't forget things like environmental conditioning. For instance, think about colonial nesting birds like seabirds. The sheer density of the colony can change the local microclimate. Maybe it helps maintain a more favorable temperature, or the collective defense makes the nesting area safer. This can really boost the survival of young. All these benefits just evaporate when the colony thins out too much.
Okay, so a whole range of reasons why more is better, especially when numbers are low. And the research didn't just stop at observing this in nature, did it? The book goes into theoretical modeling, too.
It does, yeah. Chapter 3 gives a really thorough review of the theoretical studies, especially looking at how Allee effects play out in more complex models.
What was the key thing coming out of those models?
I think the main takeaway from the theoretical work is that Allee effects aren't just a problem on their own. They act like an accelerator when combined with other common threats. The models really showed how Allee effects interact with things like variable food supplies or pressure from predators, or even how it hits different age groups differently, like larvae versus breeding adults.
So it sounds like once you put the Allee effect into a realistic, complex system, it's the ingredient that can really push things over the edge, ensure the collapse happens.
That's a good way to put it. It's the accelerator. Oh, and we should also mention the genetic link. There's a whole chapter on that, too.
Ah, right. Genetics can play a role, too.
That's funny. The authors show how Allee effects can also pop up through genetic mechanisms. It can create this nasty feedback loop of scarcity. Low numbers mean less mate choice.
Which leads to inbreeding.
Exactly.
Oh.
Which further lowers fitness, which makes the population even smaller, reinforcing the whole decline.
Yeah.
It's complex.
Okay, so we've got a clear definition. We understand why it was maybe overlooked historically, and we have these multiple, quite devastating mechanisms. What does this all mean for the people on the ground, the conservationists? How does knowing about the Allee effect actually change conservation efforts, real-world recovery projects?
Well, Chapter 5, the one on conservation and management, it lands on a really massive practical conclusion. It focuses heavily on something called propagule size.
Propagule size.
Yeah, it's basically the number of individuals you use to start a new population or to boost an existing one, like when you release captive-bred animals back into the wild. And the critical finding, the really stark one, is that you often can't just release a small handful of animals and, cross your fingers. There's often a specific threshold propagule size. You absolutely have to exceed that number to give the new population any decent chance of actually establishing itself and recovering.
So if you release too few?
If you release too few, they might immediately fall below that critical density needed for finding mates, or for group defense, or whatever the key Allee mechanism is for that species. They could just wink out of existence due to the Allee effect before they even get a chance to breed or establish themselves properly.
Wow. That must dramatically increase the cost and the complexity of reintroduction projects. If you're trying to reintroduce, say, an endangered fish species that broadcasts spawns, it means you might need to release thousands, maybe tens of thousands, not just a few dozen, to make sure enough eggs and sperm actually meet in the water column.
Absolutely. You can change the entire scale, the logistics, the funding needed for an undertaking. And the big message from all the work Courchamp and colleagues pulled together is this: Rare species management must now apply the precautionary principle much more rigorously when it comes to population size, meaning practitioners have to actively consider and account for the possibility of alley effects, even if they haven't been directly measured or proven for that specific species yet. Because the risk of failure if you don't release enough is just too high. You waste resources, you potentially doom the animals you released. You have to err on the side of releasing more.
It's really clear then. Waterclad Allee's ideas from the 30s. They're not just historical footnotes anymore. They're looming very large in today's struggles to preserve biodiversity.
Absolutely. The alley effect is no longer just some niche topic. It's a central factor in understanding population dynamics, especially for threatened species.
It definitely deserves more than just a passing mention in basic ecology textbooks now.
For sure. And the service the authors did here, by collecting all these empirical studies, both the ones that found alley effects and, importantly, those that didn't, and synthesizing the theory, it gives future researchers a really solid foundation.
A necessary framework, really.
Yeah. The book reviewer in the source material strongly recommended it for grad students, for libraries, for any ecologist's bookshelf, and I'd have to agree, it crystallized the field at a critical time.
Okay, so let's leave our listeners with a final thought to chew on. If successful conservation, especially reintroductions, really hinges on hitting that critical population size before recovery can even start, we absolutely have to release that large propagal size to overcome the alley effect. What does that imply for how we allocate scarce conservation funding? Should we maybe concentrate our resources much more intensely on fewer species or fewer populations of a species to absolutely guarantee they get above that critical threshold, rather than, say, spreading thinner resources across many endangered species, maybe risking alley-driven failure in all of them because we never quite released enough anywhere? That's a tough, practical question to ponder as we wrap up this deep dive.